And 3, 2, 1, welcome. We have a very special guest today. Please tell us about yourself. I'm very excited to have you on and talk all the vagina talk.
Yeah, that's what I do. Thank you very much for having me. So my name is Kim Vopni, and my kind of brand is the Vagina Coach, and I came upon that a little bit accidentally on purpose, I would say. And the story kind of begins really when I was little, and I remember seeing a childbirth education class in 6th grade and thinking, oh my God, I'm never doing that. But then being very curious, saying, well, my mom did it and my aunts did it. And, kind of having this bit of fear fascination about childbirth. And anyway, years go on, and I was asking my mom questions, and she had episiotomy births, and she had back pain. She had a tummy that would never flatten. And, so I kind of was looking at all of this thinking, oh my gosh, I definitely am not going to, this is not something I want to sign up for. But anyway, I took that information and I thought, okay, well, that's great. And I'm not going to do that. And so I started sort of growing, teen years and into, 20s, I was like, no, not having babies. And then I met my husband, and, then of course we're kind of talking about families, and decided that I did want to start a family, but it was still kind of a little bit uncertain about what I was going to do. And I thought I'll just opt for a cesarean section. And then I watched the next year, I watched my sister-in-law give birth, and she used a midwife, which I'd heard of, but at the time it was sort of associated with, it's witchcraft, and it's so alternative and strange. So that was my first witness of midwifery assisted birth. She was in a sideline birth position. She did perineal massage. So she had educated herself and built this great birth team. And I was very empowered by watching my sister-in-law give birth. It was like nothing I've ever seen before. And anyway, following year, I'm pregnant, and I reach out. I have a midwife. I'm asking her and the other midwife, her partner, what I can do. Perineal massage was definitely a topic. And then they said there's this other thing called the Epino, which is a biofeedback device for pelvic floor training and birth prep. It's from Germany. And so I researched this product. It made sense to me. I bought one. I used it. I had a great experience. Yes, I also used midwives. Yes, I was in a sideline birth position. Yes, I prepared my body. I was ready for it. And so that was one piece of what I feel contributed to my birth experience being positive. But then I was thinking, my other friends weren't having such great birth stories. And I thought, I wonder if more people could know about this. So I contacted the company and said, hey, can I be a kind of like a distributor? And it was not intended to be a business. It was supposed to just be kind of a little side gig. And so I started selling this product, and I didn't even have a website. It was just word of mouth. And then I did start a website a few years later. And then in 2009, I was laid off from my corporate job. So I had worked in fitness for many years. Then I went into human resources, and at the time we had moved away. My husband is a pilot. We didn't have family nearby. I was working full time, and I was in the back of my mind thinking, I wonder if I could turn this sale of this product into a business and therefore be at home and have more time with my kids. 3 months later, after I had that kind of self-discussion with myself, I got laid off. So I thought, okay, here we go. I'm going to start. So I started a website and started reaching out to people, and people started referring to me, and they were pelvic floor physiotherapists or physical therapists, as they're called in the States. I had never heard of one before. And so I reached out to a couple and said, thank you for referring people to me, but can I learn more about what you do? And so I met with them and I was lucky enough to attend a couple of courses. They let me not to become certified, but to sit in and see what was happening. And then I started to think, my gosh, like every single woman should see a pelvic floor physical therapist, especially once you've had a baby, once you've been pregnant and had a baby. And so that's what got me into this. And at the time I was really focused on helping women prepare during their pregnancy. So looking at that was such an opportunity for a preventive mindset. And I recertified my fitness, specialized in pre-postnatal, created a program called Prepare to Push, and was working exclusively with pregnant women. And then I started to recognize that there was a whole recovery piece afterwards. So I was looking at birth as being this physical event that we should be training for, and looking like, how would I train for a marathon? How would I train for this? And use the principle of specificity. And I wasn't necessarily looking at the recovery element, which is a key piece of any training regimen. Yeah. So I started to look at that, started to see the connection between the abdominal wall and the pelvic floor. I ended up partnering with two other women, and we created a separate business called Bellies Inc., where we manufactured a postpartum recovery garment called the AB System, and that kind of became my main focus for a while. So my business was online product sales, and it kind of was running itself. We started Bellies Inc., we started growing that. We then created certification courses for professionals to learn how to assess within their scope, how to screen for diastasis and chronic back pain and prolapse and incontinence and all those things. And that was, that kind of brought up till about, the end of in October 2019, so almost a year ago, I bought my partners out of Bellies Inc. And then I actually wasn't intended, but I ended up selling Bellies Inc. in June of this year.
Wow, congrats.
And I took the courses out of it and just sold the product side of the business. And the Vagina Coach title came a few years ago. I was speaking at a conference for for women entrepreneurs, and all the speakers had been some sort of business coach, like marketing or strategy or funnels or whatever it was. And so then it's my turn. I come on stage and I say, so now you have a vagina coach for your business. And it just kind of came out, but it was a light bulb moment. And I thought it totally sums up what I do, because I had started to work with women through all life stages. And yeah, so that's kind of high level how I got to where I am and where the Vagina Coach term came from. And now I'm a passionate promoter of pelvic health.
I love it that it's, you're in Canada?
Yes,
I just heard the accent. That's why I'm assuming. But is vagina a word there that's like thrown around loosely or not really?
No,
I love it that you just say it, because I think that it should be normalized.
Totally.
But for whatever reason, it's such a taboo word, and it's like everyone comes out of one. Like,
totally.
Why is this such a weird
it's a body
word?
part. It's like we can name all the other parts freely and openly, and then we have all these code words for everything else, and that's part of what has contributed to this. It's being such a shameful place or embarrassed to talk about.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So no, I had somebody tell me, actually, she's a nurse continence advisor, and she'll throw around any word, but she said, the word vagina is one of the most hated words in the English language. And I thought, well, I'm going to try to change that, because we just have to start talking about it openly and just share the word. So it makes people stop. It makes people think. It makes people pay attention to what I want them to pay attention to. So it
gets your point across.
Uncomfortable living here forever.
Yeah. Well, good. I mean, I think that, what do they say? The first impression is what sticks. So it's really a good way to make a good first impression of this is my point, and I'm, I've got a strong point and I'm sticking to it, kind of thing. It's good. Totally. I love it. Yeah. So now what? You recently sold. Congrats. That's awesome. And you have your, the step-by-step plan that you work with. And I see a lot of stuff on your Instagram with different things that you do. So you trained in physical therapy after you took the seminar, or you just now you're continuing to learn?
Yeah, I think I'm always continuing to learn. I'm not a physical therapist, so I'm a personal trainer. And what sort of when I was starting early on, there really was, when I first started, Facebook was not really yet used as business. It was still a personal platform. The business platform at the time, social media wise, was Twitter, and that was all that there was. And so I started to go on Twitter, and there really wasn't a lot. And then I started to use hashtags, hashtag pelvic floor. And then one day there was this hit from a urogynecologist in Reno, Nevada, called, his name's Dr. Bruce Crawford, and his program's called Pilates, which is pelvic floor Pilates. Mm-hmm. And I was reading about what he was talking about, and he was, at that time, one of the first that I had read or found who was talking about the pelvic floor as part of a team rather than this muscle group that needed to be isolated from everything else. And I didn't necessarily believe or understand how we could isolate it or why we should. Yes, we have to connect with it, but I did appreciate that it was part of this global team. And so I reached out to him and said, I would really love to learn more about your program. So I bought his program and I used it and tried it out, and it was very aligned with what I was teaching. And I ended up going down to, well, first of all, I actually invited him up to Canada to teach his course to a group of people that I had gathered. And right around the time he came up, it was just before I was moving back to Vancouver. So I had moved to Toronto for a few years with my husband's job, and we were moving back to Vancouver. And then he said, well, why don't we do a course in Vancouver too? So then he came to Vancouver and we did a course. And then that kind of started a 2-year relationship of me teaching with him in various places, which was fantastic. And I learned so much. And also got to go down to Reno and get hooked up to his technology. So he uses wireless EMG to assess the pelvic floor, the transverse abdominis, the adductors, the inner thighs, and the deep abdominals, the transversus, the glutes. And so I went down and then I was experimenting with my philosophy of bringing the breath in and coordinating the breath with the pelvic floor, and would that make a difference? And it did. And so anyway, that was kind of like impetus for me to keep going on that path and starting to tell others. So that's around the time when we had started Bellies Inc. and we had all these fitness, we worked in fitness, we were at conferences all the time, and we were always, recognizing there was such a huge void. And so we said, we have to change this. So we started then developing our own course and then trying to bridge the gap between physical therapy and fitness, because a lot of physical therapists were not afraid, but they were very cautious about prescribing movement or sending their patients back out to regular fitness classes, because the fitness industry as a whole was very ill-informed or not informed at all. And so they would end up getting those people back with more symptoms or worsening or what have you. And so we wanted to bridge that gap. And one of my business partners was and is a pelvic floor physical therapist. So we took our course to get it to fitness professionals, to learn how to assess and screen for core and pelvic floor challenges within their scope, and then prescribe movement that would contribute to healing and helping, rather than things that would potentially interfere with or potentially worsen things like incontinence and prolapse and that kind of thing.
Got it.
So once I sold, long story, we did that for many years, and we still co-teach together. And so once the product side was sold in June, it really allowed me to focus, because running 2 businesses, yes, there was overlap. There was always the theme of pelvic floor, but it was a lot. So it allowed me to kind of get my scope back in focus and really look at, my passion is coaching women, either one-on-one, so through calls like this online, or through online programs for people who kind of like to just give me what I need to know and let me go and do it. And so that's what I do. I have 2 challenges that are app-based. There's one for pregnant people, one for non-pregnant people, and that's sort of an introduction for people to understand my approach, my philosophy, my foundations, the principles, the movement, that type of thing. And then from there, people can, I have courses, or
what are the apps called?
They're called the Buff Muff Challenge is the one for non-pregnant people, and then Birth Like a Boss is the one for pregnant people.
Also, muff is like a dirty looking sounding term, but I like it. I'm happy you're using it.
Yeah, that seems to have resonated with a lot of people. They really like the name, but
that's playful.
and then there's the professional side. So for the fitness professionals, or really anybody, there's been chiropractors, massage therapists, osteopaths, midwives, doulas, like people. And there are I'm going to fly here. There's a few different, there are a few different courses depending on what your area of expertise is. Right. But those are kind of where I now manage, is education for professionals and helping consumers with online programs and coaching.
So 2 separate, so one for the education, the professionals, how long is that course, I guess because I'm assuming it's like a go at your own pace type of thing? And how long typically
It's about 16. Actually, I'm about to relaunch the updated version. So it's about 18 hours worth of content. And then it's called the Core Confidence Specialist Certification. And then there's a pre-postnatal certification that is an extension of that. Mm-hmm. So it is everything from the Core Confidence course, plus everything you need to know if you're training pregnant women. So all of everything about pre-postnatal fitness. And you also get a copy of the book that we co-wrote with Human Kinetics called Pregnancy Fitness. And that one is about 22 hours of content, and it's online. The the core confidence, we do sometimes still teach in person live. Obviously during COVID, that wasn't happening.
Yeah.
I have master trainers around North America who teach in their own communities. And we got together in June and did an online virtual certification. And there's another one coming up on the 18th. So in a couple of weeks through CanFit Pro, there's a live virtual option as well. And yeah, so that's kind of, so it's between like 18 to 22 hours of content, depending on which course you take.
It's really nice. I know, because I also have been in this fitness space for about 10 years now in New York.
Yeah.
And, you know, before COVID, the fitness space here is booming. Like there's gyms, you know, everything's a building here. So there's gyms on top of gyms, like literally just stacked. And it's such a huge industry, whether it's, you know, the HIIT classes or the spin classes or this or that or CrossFit or weight, whatever it is. And obviously now it's so different with COVID. A lot of things had to close, and it's, you know, the sad story. But I know for a fact that so many fitness professionals have no idea when it comes to pregnant women. I was just speaking with a midwife, and she's amazing, but she was telling me how so much is, everything that she does is statistic based, or comes from numbers, because she also has a PhD. So she really likes to have evidence and show hard facts. Yeah. But so anyhow, she was saying that basically people look at, and it's true, because I was pregnant last year at this time. I gave birth like 5.5 months ago, but they look at you as though you're disabled or it's a handicap, and it's really not at all the case. But, you know, they put you in this little box, and the problem is even though so many women have babies, like a large percentage of the population, to some degree, it almost seems like they take advantage of, oh, you're pregnant? Do you feel sick? Do you need to sit down? Like, I don't think, like, no, this is what our bodies are made for. Yes, I understand there's, you know, some instances where these one-off scenarios, but I don't think women are weak. So I don't think that they should be allowed to be weak during this time. Like, yes, you're creating a human, but I don't know. You get my point.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I think that there's a blend there of a litigious society that we are in. And so people are afraid because they don't want to do anything that could potentially cause any harm. So everyone's proceeding with quite a bit of caution. And for a long time, it was accepted that, you know, oh, you're pregnant, so you need to stop doing this, and you just sit and you're just pregnant. And then that obviously was challenged over the years. And then what has happened it's kind of gone to the other extreme, where now we have women doing CrossFit and, you know, super high intense, or running marathons, or doing all this sort of stuff while they're pregnant. And while I agree and appreciate that it is not a disability, it's not an illness, it is still not, in my opinion, the time to be going for personal bests and, you know, super high endurance activities. I think that we have an opportunity to build this amazing person, and also support our body through the changes, so that we're not necessarily, because some of the changes, when we aren't aware of them happening, which most people aren't, they just kind of accept, well, I'm just pregnant now, and yes, my boobs are getting bigger, or my belly is getting bigger, and they accept these changes that we see physically, but biomechanically and physiologically, we don't necessarily appreciate all that's happening, and how movement, the choices we make in movement, can either support that or potentially increase our risk of developing things like diastasis and prolapse and incontinence. So obviously I'm very laser focused on the pelvic floor and the abdominal wall. And I see people through all stages, and so many people coming, you know, I had my baby 20 years ago. I had never known this. Had I known this, I would have made this choice. Or even people who gave birth a year or two ago, still, I had no idea. And had I known, I wouldn't have done this, or I would have done this. And so there's the extremes that have happened that are being applauded. Like, we live in this world too, that is just like, we glorify, we highlight, we like, we save, we comment on people doing amazing, amazing feats and things. I don't want to take away from that. However, I feel like we kind of have to come back somewhere in the middle, where it's not a time to be sitting around and not moving because we have this this challenge ahead of us. We do have a challenge ahead of us. And it's not also a time, in my opinion, to be doing those personal best extreme fitness measures. I think we need to move in ways using the principle of specificity to prepare us for birth. That's our event that we're training for. And so when we prepare with specificity, looking at what are the most optimal birth positions, what muscles do I need strength and suppleness and endurance in, what are some of the breathing patterns that will help me, what's happening in pushing and how can I facilitate that, what should my recovery look like, what should my, when we're training for a marathon, we run progressive distances right before, like in the weeks before race day, we taper that off and we conserve our energy. And then there's a recovery element after we participate in our event. And I view pregnancy and birth the same way. We're preparing, we're building up in specific ways in the weeks before birth, where there's a taper off period where we're resting, we're replenishing, we're building up our stores. We perform on race day. It's not a race, but you know what I mean? And then there's an element of recovery. And that is also a huge piece of the puzzle that is grossly overlooked and also celebrated, where people are back at the gym, not so much in COVID, but back doing box jumps or looking like they haven't had a baby within 2 weeks and posting photos. So there's lots of mixed messages, and I'm hoping that we start to kind of see a middle ground again, where I feel it's more supportive of our body as a female body, more supportive from both in pregnancy, but also for life.
Yeah, it's such a wild time, because there's always going to be the naysayers, and there's always going to be the few people that are like, good for you, you got it, whatever it is. And there's always going to be both sides. Yeah. And I think that it's just so interesting because this time with social media, everything, if you allow it, is just there. Yeah. So, you really open yourself up to the criticism or the applause. You really allow, and if you allow it, then of course it's going to happen. So I think it's just very interesting when it's an extreme to one or the other. Yeah. And when women find their happy medium, obviously that's the healthiest and the safest thing. And it is very interesting because no pregnancy, even with the same woman, it's different every single time.
Yeah, totally. So many different influences. And I think part of, if I look back at when I started all this, it was recognizing through my own pregnancy that I knew about the pelvic floor because my mom had shared with me, and I knew the negative aspects. I knew that she had incontinence. I knew that she had surgery. I knew that she had episiotomy. So I had this kind of negative view of it, and that it was just something like, oh, well, that just happens when you get older. And I had made the choice that I did want to have a baby. I did think very hard about having an elective cesarean and did my research on that and weighed the pros and cons, decided I wanted to have a vaginal birth, and then looked at all the ways that I could help prevent tearing, episiotomy, but things like, so I knew about incontinence because my mom had gone through that and I had seen it in the media. Prolapse, pelvic organ prolapse, I had never heard the term. I had never heard it talked about anywhere. And when you look at statistically now, there was a study that came out with a large group of women, and over 83% of women have some degree of prolapse at 6 weeks postpartum, whether that was a vaginal birth or a cesarean birth. And 50%, just over 50% of that 83% had a stage 2 prolapse or greater. And so when you think about how common it is, and the fact that nobody is talking about it before, or nobody is screening for it after, nobody is giving guidelines from a recovery perspective, nobody's referring, just, basically nothing, saying everybody go to pelvic floor physio. There's a huge missing link. And that's kind of where I started, was we need more information beforehand. I've always been a preventive mindset person. I would rather do what I can to prevent something happening or minimize it, rather than find out about it and then maybe have resentment because I could have prevented it, but then have a tougher hill to climb. And so when I look at the evolution of fitness and how it kind of gets harder and harder and harder and more extreme, and the women's movement of everybody wanting to feel inclusive, and that, I can do that as well. I agree, but physiologically, the female body is different, and we really truly need to understand those differences. We need to understand the menstrual cycle, the hormone, the influence of hormone, the influence of pregnancy, the postpartum aspect, what has changed in our physiology, in our musculature, in our core support system, all that. We need to understand that, and making that part of, doesn't have to go deep in science, but at least an overview in pregnancy, so that people are aware of these changes and making choices based on that, informed choices, because I don't feel like it's always been very, they haven't had an opportunity to make informed decisions in their fitness and movement for pregnancy and postpartum.
Yeah, I have a couple questions on that. So one, I want to go back to the prolapse, and I want you to explain maybe some, because I don't know if I'm not so familiar with it. So, which I'm the majority. So, is it something you could feel? You don't feel it? What does it feel like? It doesn't hurt. It does hurt. If you sneeze and you pee, you laugh and you pee. Are these all forms of this? Can you so that's one. And then the other one was, I definitely, especially being in the fitness space in New York City, there's such a, and everyone's body's different. So I think that that's the most important thing that a lot of females, I don't know if they forget, but they don't take into consideration when, they see this person or that person or whatever on social media, and they don't know if she's getting her period or if she is or if she's not, or if she wants to have kids or she doesn't. So, they see that she's looks a certain way and they want to look that way. And it's like, okay, but that that may or may not be good for your body depending on your overall goal.
Right.
Like, and I know so many females, and I'm a perfect example. So and it's literally something that I've always had. Even when I was overweight, like I played volleyball in college, and I was probably I weighed as much as I did when I was like 8 months pregnant. And I had abs. Like, I've always had abs. Like, even now, I'm a couple months, I got my 6-pack back at like 3 or 4 months postpartum. Like, it's just something where I don't have a lot of fat that goes there, but I've always had a normal period. And I think that a lot of girls look at me and they're like, well, you have abs. And I don't starve myself. I eat very regularly. I eat everything I want, but I just am super active.
Yeah.
So I think that a lot of people don't take it. And obviously, as we all know, social media is such a, you just see from the outside. Like, I'm not posting what I eat. I just post my workouts and little things about my baby and here and there, my dog, my husband. But it's really a wild thing because people, and I get messages like, what are your macronutrients? What are you eating? What's this? What's that? And I'm like, honestly, I don't know, because I eat whatever I see. Truly seafood diet. I see food, I eat it. And I'm just super lucky. Like, it's genetics. I work out hard, whatever it is. But I think that that's why it's such an interesting thing, and it's sad because I was able to get pregnant easily, thankfully, knock on wood. But for most people, I know a lot of females who have issues getting pregnant because they never had a regular period, and their body doesn't have enough fatty tissue on it because of that, because they're depriving themselves, because they're not taking care of themselves, they're not nourishing themselves. And I think that, I don't know if this is the right word, but I don't know what the word is, but getting pregnant and having a successful birth is truly the test of how you've taken care of your body. Like, or I don't know if test is the right word, but if you've really taken care of your body all this time, because
it can be a reflection of it for sure.
So it's really a wild thing because I do think that there's a lot of good on social media, like how else would I have found you? How else, do you connect with people? But there's also such this just shiny thing that people see that's not accurate.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and I totally agree with you. And I think, I know that there is a movement, the body positivity movement, the body positive movement is definitely making an influence. And there's a lot more people now who potentially typically post images of themselves fit or not, or also pointing out when, that I do have rolls, I do have cellulite, whatever it is. So I think that it is happening, and that is a good that's coming out of social media, because initially, and still for some people, that it is very much everything's lovely, everything's
just
wonderful.
Rosy, beautiful. That's it.
Yes, exactly. So there are many, many accounts. The bird's papaya is probably one of the most prominent ones. And her writing is fantastic. Her images are amazing. She is such a positive voice for like getting rid of the shit, and just being real and authentic and genuine and calling out.
I need to look her up. I've never.
Yeah,
the bird's papaya.
She's definitely somebody who, Sarah Nicole Andrews, her account's The Bird's Papaya, and she also has a podcast called the Papaya Podcast. She's actually currently pregnant right now too, which is great to follow her journey. But anyway, she highly recommend. Another person I recommend following from an education perspective with regards to the female anatomy is Dr. Stacey Sims. So she has a book called Roar, and it talks about the physiology, the menstrual cycle, the eating, the hormones, the movement, all the sort of stuff that can really influence how we as women should be, or how we would most benefit from training when we appreciate our physiology, our anatomy, our function, that type of thing. So those are two things that I recommend. With regards to the first part of the question, from a prolapse perspective, so I'll give you a quick anatomy or a quick demonstration about what it is. So if you can imagine that my sleeve is the vagina, the muscular tube of the vagina. At the top of the vagina is our uterus and cervix. This would be the anterior or the front wall, and I would have my bladder here, and then this would be the posterior wall, back wall of the vagina, and there's the rectum. And so prolapse, pelvic organ prolapse, POP as it's sometimes called or referenced, is when one or more of those organs shifts out of its optimal alignment. And in the case of the bladder or the rectum, it will start to bulge into the vagina. In the case of the uterus, it just starts to descend into the vagina. And in early stage prolapse, so stage 1 was where it would be, there's just kind of a tiny little bulge. Stage 2 would be the bulge is more prominent. It's about I'm forgetting now if it's inches or centimeters away from the entrance of the vagina, the introitus. So it's visible if you look, but you can't feel it. Stage 3 would be where the bulge is at the entrance to the vagina, and stage 4 would be where the bulge is outside of the vagina. And if you can imagine a scrotum, so you can imagine a scrotum coming out of a vagina, that's kind of what a 4th stage prolapse would look like.
Yikes.
Very, very life-altering. It's not life-threatening per se, but it is very life-altering. That's something, a quote from Dr. Crawford that he has. It's
not life-threatening? You would think it would be, both.
Sorry, what was your question?
You would think that it'd be life-altering, yes, because everything you do, but also it's not life-threatening? You would think it would be.
Yeah, you kind of think it would be, but no, it definitely affects function of certain, like elimination, that type of thing, which could potentially lead to something that would be life-threatening down the road. Like going to the bathroom, going poop. Yeah, so for me, I have a rectocele, which is when my rectum bulges into my vagina, and it's a stage 2. And I talk a lot about that on my social media, and it is now, a lot of people now, not so much just with prolapse, but specifically with rectocele, are like, oh my God, what do you eat? How do you move? How do you exercise? Because there's so little information, especially about rectocele. There's so little information about what you can or can't do. And anyway, so that's kind of what I shed light on. But anyway, so mine is a stage 2. Mine bulges into the back wall of my vagina. And if you haven't managed your poop, your digestion well, especially if you have hard stool, it can get trapped in that pocket and make it very difficult to eliminate. And some people actually have to put a finger into the vagina and push that bulge back so that it can actually come out. That's called splinting. I don't have to do that, thankfully, because I'm very, very careful with what I eat and how I move and how I poop and all that stuff. But that doesn't mean, like, most days I'm asymptomatic. I don't have symptoms most days. When I first had it, so I've had it for about 8 or so years. I can't remember exactly.
Where did it come from?
What's that?
Where did it come from?
Never will 100% know, but most likely from the birth of my first child. So when my first son was born, he crowned. So usually they crown with this part of their head coming out. And my son came that way. So he came the widest, there was a wider width of his head rather than just the top crowning part. And so I didn't have any external tearing, but I had internal tearing that I didn't know about until years later when I started to see a pelvic floor physical therapist. And so right where the bulge of my rectocele is where that accumulation of scar tissue is. So it's, because I didn't know about it, I didn't know about pelvic floor physio until, a year or so after my second child was born. Then I didn't actually, at the time when I first learned about it, I thought, oh, well, this is who I'm going to refer people to for problems. But then I started quickly to say, well, everybody should go, and I'm going to go because I want to learn about it. And then, so that's where I found out. And yeah, so right at that little accumulation of scar tissue. So that was impeding muscle function. So who knows? It could be from that.
Yeah.
It could be, I don't know, it could be lots of things. I also I didn't know, but I have an autoimmune condition called Hashimoto's, which affects the thyroid, which contributes to constipation. So I had many years of struggling with, I couldn't understand why I was constipated. I exercise, I drink water, I eat healthfully. I do all these things. How can I be constipated? And I had no idea. So that was another kind of learning journey that I still am on now. So it could have been because I was dealing with constipation. Could have been the two together. Who knows? I'll never know 100% what caused it.
And you never felt it. How did you know that you had it? Like, how did you?
So once I started seeing a pelvic floor physio. So right after my first son was born, I remember feeling like I had a golf ball in my anus. And some people who have prolapse will say something like that. I feel like something's there, or I feel like I'm sitting on a ball. And again, I didn't know it at the time. I thought, oh, it's just, that's how you feel after you have a baby. So it eventually subsided. And then I had a second baby, and then, I didn't have it as strong with my second birth, but it eventually subsided. Then I started seeing a physio, and she's like, oh, yeah, you got a little rectocele here. And then, so it was fairly early stage, but then that was right around the time when I started to be dealing with constipation. So I feel like that worsened it. And so I was dealing with some symptoms eventually. And then as I started healing the Hashimoto's and changing diet and working on all that stuff, my symptoms decreased. So there are days still where I have symptoms, but most days I don't.
What are symptoms that you have, for example?
So mine are feeling like there's something in there, or if I move or bend a certain way, I can feel it. Early, like before I had addressed my eating, before I had eliminated some of the foods that were causing issues for me, I would feel sometimes if I ate something with gluten or something that was irritating to my body, I would almost feel like there was popcorn in my rectum. Like I would feel like these little bubbles almost. It sounds kind of weird.
So wild.
Yeah.
No, but it's a good way to describe it.
Yeah. And then if I ate something that caused gas, and if I had to fart, but if I wasn't in a place where I could let one rip, then I would hold it, and then that gas would get trapped in that little pocket too, and then that would increase symptoms. Or if I was constipated, then that it would get stuck, and then so it was just kind of this vicious cycle that I still dance between it. And I kind of, some days I just think like, oh my God, I wish I didn't have to think about my butt, or I didn't have to think about prolapse, or I wish it. But then there's other days where I feel very grateful that I know that I should be very vigilant with these things, because it affects my pelvic health, which affects everything else in my life. So early stage prolapse for many people is asymptomatic. Some people early stage can have very strong symptoms if they're very, very body aware. But so many people have no idea that they have early stage prolapse, and they aren't aware until it becomes further, where they're like, I wiped and I felt a bulge, or I can see a bulge, or I had sex with my partner and his or her fingers or penis felt like it hit something, or I put a tampon in, it doesn't feel like it goes in properly, or my tampon doesn't stay and it turns around and comes out the other way.
Yeah.
Or urinary retention. I feel like sometimes
Is that a thing? Sometimes a tampon can turn around?
Yeah. So, and it can be, I would say it's probably more common with rectocele, but if early in the day, the prolapse is typically better, and it will get worse throughout the day as you've been upright against gravity, especially if you've had straining.
Gravity.
So if you insert a tampon, so here's my vagina again. If I've inserted the tampon, and if over that day that bulge gets more, it can push and then potentially contribute to the tampon turning itself around or just descending.
Yeah.
Or a menstrual cup, it can do the same thing.
Oh my God, I got a menstrual, one of those damn cups stuck in me.
Yeah. Oops.
Well, I have a girlfriend who recommended it, so I folded it and did
Yeah.
and I couldn't get it out. I don't know if it was my nail or what, but I freaked out, and it was in there for like, I don't know, maybe this isn't very long, but maybe like 8 minutes, 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting on the mirror. I'm like, got my leg up and I'm trying to get it out, and I will not be sticking one of those up there anytime soon. Again.
Yeah, they can be great. I think there's a lot of people that use them, and there's many benefits. I find that they, for many reasons, I think they're very good.
Do you suggest them?
What's that?
You suggest them?
For some people, like I think there's a really good site called putacupinit.com, and
okay.
it has all the different resources, like all the different cups. There's a quiz to see which one's the best for you. There's one, and I'm trying to remember the name. There's one particular company in Germany that makes one. I'll have to send you back I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but
okay.
Merula, I think it is, Merula.
Okay.
And that has, many people with prolapse have actually found that one to be quite effective. So if you have a prolapse and you put anything in, it could potentially not, like tampon wise, it may not stay, cup wise, it may not secure or stay sex. Like if a penis goes in, it might hit something. So there's anything going in, there's a bit of a different landscape if you have a prolapse. And there's different pressures that happen throughout the day that can also influence the position of that. If we're talking about menstrual cups here. So depending on what type of prolapse you have, different cups may or may not work. And sometimes it can be a bit of a trial and error. The important part with cups is once you've inserted them and they open up and they kind of create that suction, a lot of people just try to pull them out, and that can create some drag. So it can irritate the tissue, and it could potentially irritate or influence the prolapse as well. So you really want to make sure that when you insert a finger, and sometimes even two, that you break that seal. So you push in to break the suction first, and then you kind of collapse it, and then you take it out. So that's the important part of removing a menstrual cup. Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah. There's another great site called IncoStress, INCO, and then stress.co.uk. And she manufactured a product called the IncoStress, which many people use as a pessary. And she's actually, over the years, designed other products. And she has a cup now that she has designed. Forget this one. She's hopefully sending me a sample of it. But it actually had like a little, instead of having to insert your finger to push to break the suction, it was just a little kind of nodule at the bottom that you just squeezed, and that released the suction, and you pulled it out. So I felt like that could be
a little more accessible to the finger.
Yeah. Yeah. So prolapse is very, very common, and statistically more common than incontinence, but it is way less talked about. And it is the one that affects our mental health the most. It can be devastating when people find out they have a prolapse. And right now, usually the way they find out is not always through pelvic floor physio. Usually it's through their doctor, or they've been referred to a gynecologist, and then the gynecologist says, it recommends surgery usually, and surgery can be life-changing for many people. I'm not against surgery at all.
Life-changing good?
Life-changing good. Well, life-changing good and bad. But I'll get to that in a second. But then the people think that's their only option. And I think surgery can play a role, but all the other the more conservative approaches, in my opinion, should be pursued first before we go down that route. So they go down the medical community. They haven't heard about pelvic floor physical therapy, and then they just kind of like, okay, well, this is what it is, and this is what I have to do, and I just have to have surgery, and that's it. And then they're told you can't lift anything over, 20 pounds. You can't run anymore. You can't jump anymore. And so then they're thinking, oh my God, and they become very limited in their movement, and that affects also the other aspects of their health, including their mental health. And so it becomes very isolating, and they're afraid to move, and they withdraw from relationships. And so we really need to do better at screening and talking about it, and giving people strategies afterwards from a recovery perspective that helps break that stigma.
Yeah, it's really, I think that it's a big issue, that disconnect between medical And I don't think that necessarily physical therapy is holistic, but it's the more holistic approach. It's the manual labor, right? Like you have to do it. And there's a huge disconnect because a lot of people, even whether it's your vagina or your foot or whatever it is that you might have surgery on, it doesn't seem like they refer out their patients after surgery. And I know this from multiple people I know had a cyst removed or had, random things. And then they go home and they're like, well, it's really sore and it's really tight and I don't know what to do. And I'm like, well, go see a physical therapist. But my doctor didn't say I need to, but you need to.
Yeah.
Yeah, but, and I'm like, no, but you have to see a physical therapist. Will help you actually. It'll probably be painful and it'll probably be uncomfortable to get moving and to get rid of that fascia tissue or whatever is in there, but you have to do it. And I don't understand why there's such a disconnect between doctors in general.
Yeah, I don't know why that is either. And it's also something that I'm trying to promote. And I was actually thankfully last week or a week and a half or so ago, I went to see a colorectal surgeon about my own body. So I've got kind of skin tags that hang out all the time. So I was just curious.
What are those from?
From hemorrhoids. So
the tags are from hemorrhoids?
Yeah. And also just from pressure from childbirth. Like it's very, very common for people to say, my anus doesn't look quite the same as it used to. And it's a little more skin there, a little more stuff there, because there's stuff that comes out from pressure and it can stay there. So anyway, there's different lasers and all this kind of stuff. So I was just curious as to what options are that out there. But anyway, he was talking about, he refers to pelvic floor physio. And I thought, thank God, like there has to be more of this happening. And if back to the surgery point, surgery can be life-changing good wise. So it can take away the symptoms. It can free people's mental, like there's even studies that show the depressive scale, like their mental health improves with surgery because it takes away those symptoms that have interfered with their life so much. It can also be negative. So surgery can sometimes create pain. Sometimes it could, there could be accidents, like doctors are humans and maybe it influences another organ or, there's lots of things that could be good or bad. More so good, I would say. And the missing link there is people have surgery. Again, so no one has ever spoken to them about pelvic floor physical therapy. They've been told they need to have surgery. The women are like, okay, I'm going to go have a surgery and maybe get my uterus taken out because my uterus was prolapsing, or maybe I have a rectocele fixed, or maybe I have the bladder sling surgery. And they have that and it takes away the symptoms and they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. Now I feel like myself again. I feel like I can run and I can jump. But without the knowledge of what contributed to that prolapse or challenge happening in the first place, we are often dealing with compensatory strategies or movement patterns that will foster or make that come back, basically. And so there's a high recurrence of repeat surgeries, and it's quite high within the first 2 years. And if there was a collaboration between surgeons and pelvic floor physical therapists for prehab, mm-hmm. so getting the muscles in their best condition possible before surgery, and then rehab, and what they should be doing in those early weeks, seeing the pelvic floor physio post-operatively, managing that scar tissue, managing the function of the muscles, then I think that there would be far less recurrence, especially in those early years. And the surgery, the length of time that surgery would last would most likely be significantly longer. We really don't have research to show that yet. I think it just makes sense. And it's definitely what I promote. So hopefully, and there are some medical professionals who cross-collaborate all the time. And I just wish it was now the norm. I wish everybody would do that.
100%. I think that along those same lines, you see, and I see it more in fitness, but I'm assuming it's a very similar thing, and you could tell me yes or no, where in fitness, people, they see a workout and they say, okay, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, but there's no set program if you actually want to see changes, right? So it's very similar. People say, okay, so I see that she's posting about this, or he's posting about this, have it, regarding prolapse, so, or like Kegels, right? So people think that Kegel, like that's, but there's so much more to it than just that.
Right.
Like it's your breathing. It's also, you got to work on the anus part. Like it's the four walls. It's not just the front part. And it almost seems like, because it's such a taboo or something that's shoved in the closet and you're not supposed to talk about, they don't ask the questions, and they try to do the research themselves, but it's like, because there's so much research out there and everything is so readily available, it's easy to be misinformed.
Yeah. And totally 100%. There's like, for a while there was just a lack of information, and now there is so much, and it is trendy to talk about pelvic floor. So there's lots of people talking about it now, some very well informed, others not so well informed. And so people who don't know the good from the bad are just kind of following blindly, and they try something and don't necessarily know. So better than nothing. Like there is great information out there, and there's a lot more conversation happening, which is fantastic. Kegel exercises are something that most people know about, have heard about at some point in their life, but it's an elusive exercise because guess what? Nobody's teaching them. People say, make sure you do your Kegel exercises. Or if maybe before they've been recommended to have surgery, maybe their doctor has said, go home and do your Kegel exercises. But very rarely has there actually been a thorough assessment of the pelvic floor and evaluation of a person's ability to do like the full contraction relaxation cycle, the full
release
range of motion of the pelvic floor. So people go home and they're like, hey, I've got to do Kegels. But also research shows us that most women are doing them incorrectly. And so then they do them their way, thinking they're doing them, but then they don't work because they have been doing them incorrectly. So then they give up, and then potentially then they go to surgery. And anyway, so it's kind of this like
cyclical,
a bit of a vicious cycle. And the thing from a fitness perspective is, I remember way back when I first was certifying, so like mid-90s when I was certifying as a personal trainer for the first time, and the core definitely was like the buzzword, and it's been a buzzword, people still, everything's core still. I did not learn that the pelvic floor is part of the core. I didn't learn that until I started to work with pelvic floor physical therapists. So 15, 14, probably
years
like,
later,
whatever, somewhere between 10 and 14 years ago, right? When I started to learn about it. So it is the foundation of the core. There's a relationship between the breathing diaphragm and the abdominal musculature and the multifidus in the back. There's this inner unit that we have that when it works optimally, we can perform better. But if you want to lift heavier, usually you can lift heavier weight. Usually you can run faster. You could jump, like everything else becomes less challenging, or you can progress more when that unit is working optimally. But if there is something in it, scar tissue, prolapse, hypertonicity, hypotonicity in the muscle group, something that's influencing its capacity for power and control, if there's something that's interfering with that, then all of our other performance in whatever workout it is that we have chosen will be subpar. So when we can optimize that inner core unit, it makes those other things more effective.
Of course, and it only makes sense. Yeah. I wonder why. I mean, I guess it's just lack of knowledge why people don't. And it's not something you can see, right? So like you can go and you could do bicep curls or tricep, extensions, whatever you're doing, and you see the muscle. Like you can see a physical, oh wow, this looks pretty, or this looks whatever you want it to look. But you can't actually see those muscles in there. So I think that it's really easy for people to be lazy about it and just forget, essentially.
Yeah, we've never really been taught. We've never really understood, like maybe when we received sexual health education, or maybe when we started learning about menstruation, we understand that we have a vagina and we understand that we have a uterus. We don't necessarily look at the landscape and how everything's oriented and how everything works together and the musculature that supports that system. We don't learn that really. And so without that knowledge and without an understanding that it is so important to so many parts of our life, it's this part that it has always just worked for us, and we've never had to think about it until there's something not working, and then it becomes one of these things that we're only thinking about. And with regards to the comment you said with it's not something we can see, there's biofeedback devices. So a physical therapist is the ultimate, in my opinion, gold standard. If you are going to invest, like lots of people ask me all the time, Have you heard of the LV? Have you heard of the PeriFit? Have you heard of the jade eggs? Have you, like, all the different devices that are out there? And they
These
can
are
be
devices
super valuable.
for what specifically?
Hang on one sec, I'll come back to that thought. So they asked me about these devices, and devices can range between, $60 to $215, and a physical therapy early session, like a first session, is usually around 150-ish. And so if you're going to invest in something for your pelvic floor, if you have access, not everybody has access community-wise of where they live to a pelvic floor physical therapist, but if you do, that is your most valuable investment. Go at least one time to have your pelvic floor and your anatomy assessed, and you'll have a treatment, and that person will be able to help you understand if a device would be suitable for you or if it wouldn't be, and then potentially which one would be better. So in terms of devices, jade eggs or yoni eggs or something that have become, like, I think 50 Shades of Grey was definitely something that kind of reignited the Kegel balls or the Benoit balls for the pelvic floor, and they can play a role. There's initially, they were more supposed to be from a sexual perspective, so heightening sensation and arousal, but when they're weighted, and sometimes some of them that have the little bit of movement in there, that can also challenge the muscles. So Kegel weights can be helpful for some people. And when we talk about building hypertrophy, so bulk in our muscles, Kegels can help build potentially endurance and a little bit of strength, but to progress, adding weights can sometimes be the answer to kind of get to that next level. That being said, a lot of the training that is suggested with regards to Kegel weights is that you put it in and you hold it while you go around and do, brush your teeth or
household activities.
Whatever, your activities of daily living. And I don't 100% agree with that. I like the ones that you put in and you maybe do a set of Kegel exercises with it in, and then you take it out, and then you have a break, and then you put it back in, and you do another set. There's one called the Kegel Bell that I really like, and there's Intimate Rose has a graduated Kegel weight set that I like as well. But I don't love putting them in and holding them there for periods of time. If you're looking for it from an arousal perspective, so the Benoit balls you put in and they move a little bit and they heighten stimulation, that's a different purpose and fine. But the other thing is Kegel yoni eggs, so the jade eggs and that type of thing. I appreciate that there can be energies and benefits to certain types of stones, but they can also be porous. And when inserted into the vagina, they can increase the likelihood of infection. So I like the ones that are made of silicone if you're going to put something in. Mm-hmm. And then the biofeedback ones that actually have an element of being able to see if you are contracting and relaxing, and you watch it on your phone, is the LV, ELVIE, and the PeriFit. So those would be the two that I most commonly recommend if you don't have access to a pelvic floor physio.
Very interesting. It's so, but even regardless, if you should go see a pelvic floor specialist just one time, and then they could tell you, and if you need additional help or additional workouts or whatever you want to call them, that's when you do the devices.
Totally. Yeah. I say everyone with a vulva and a vagina should see a pelvic floor physical therapist once a year at least. Like we go to the dentist, even if we don't have a toothache, we go for screening and cleaning and assessment of our mouth. Mm-hmm. And we have been conditioned to just do that once a year, or sometimes even twice a year. And I think pelvic floor physical therapists are like dentists in the sense of they do the screening and the assessment and the treatment, and they kind of, we go to them for a check-in. How's everything, are my organs still where they're supposed to be? Am I still able to balance mm-hmm. my muscular contraction and relaxation? Any signs of this, or I've been noticing this lately. Can you, catching things early and screening for it is so important. So if you have a vulva and a vagina, I highly recommend that you see, even if you have no symptoms, go get assessed and understand your anatomy and your function, and be the one to be in control and be one step ahead instead of waiting for something to all of a sudden show up one day.
Absolutely. I think I have one more question, but before I ask, do you have anything else you want to share regarding that? Because I think that this is a topic that we could go
I could talk about that. So in terms of, I get asked where to find a pelvic floor physical therapist. So I used to have a directory on my site for many, many years. And then there's a couple now that they just do it better. It's more comprehensive. It's global. So I direct people to, if you're in the States, to pelvicguru.com.
Okay.
And there's a directory on there of pelvic floor physical therapists, fitness trainers, urogynes, like all sorts of people who are really focusing on that women's health, specifically the pelvic health niche. If you're in Canada, if you happen to be listening in Canada, Pelvic Health Solutions .ca also has a directory that you can check out. So if you, and you can also even just Google pelvic floor or pelvic floor physical therapy and whatever town you're in or city you're in or area that you're in.
My question is still regarding that same topic because it's endless and it's very interesting. Is there, I'm like, you know how sometimes you have part of the question, but not the whole thing formulated?
Yeah, all the time.
I'm like, so depending on the severity of stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, a pelvic floor specialist could help you, or, what are the options when it comes to surgery? I don't even know if you know the answers to this. I'm just asking. Because I've heard, the only thing that I've ever heard of is the mesh. Is that a thing still nowadays? Is that?
Yeah, it's so yes, a pelvic floor physical therapist can help you see or understand or know if you have an organ prolapse and what stage it's at. And ideally, when you go see, typically you have your first assessment lying down. And a really good therapist will bring you off the bed and have you stand up, and they'll assess you in standing as well, because a prolapse will present very differently here than it will upright against gravity. So if you see a physical therapist, ask them if they can assess you in standing if they don't ask for it themselves. And then the time of day that you get assessed can also influence. So usually later in the day, the prolapses are typically, they present a little greater. So the kind of more true representation of what you have is best assessed later in the day. With regards to surgery or treatment options, so pelvic floor muscle training, Kegels being one form of pelvic floor muscle training, is helpful for prolapse. The hypopressive method, also called low pressure fitness, is fairly new. It's been around in Canada or in North America for about maybe close to 10 years, probably like 9-ish years. It's been around in Europe for about somewhere between 20 and 30 years. And it is the first technique really that offers hope for potentially reversing or at least improving early stage prolapse, especially bladder and uterus. Not quite as effective for rectoceles, but it's a very, 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 very powerful technique. You can learn more at lowpressurefitness.com. And so I've certified in that. I've done the 3 levels. I use it myself. I've been doing it for 8 years. I love it. It has not made a change per se in my rectocele, but I had at one point, my uterus had started to descend, and I had reversed that and have kind of,
wow, that's amazing.
Everything else at bar, at bay, I guess.
Yeah.
With regards to surgery, there are different types. And I don't know all there's so many, there's many different options, and really you have to sit and meet with a surgeon. But I have in one of my programs, I have a whole section on surgery, an interview with Dr. Crawford, questions to ask your surgeon. One is about, is it mesh or is it native tissue? And if they historically use mesh, can they use native tissue rather than mesh? So mesh there has been huge ramifications for many, many people. Mesh has caused great harm to many people. There are some people who've had mesh that have had no ill effects, but there have been many. And so it has been removed from the market, and there's different types of mesh. And so you want to have a really good understanding of, if you are opting for surgery, what exactly will be used for that repair? And will it be your own tissue, or will there be something inserted to help kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Not like help strengthen the tissue if the native tissue isn't able to do that. Mm-hmm. And so that's a really big, long story, but definitely be aware of mesh and make sure you're asking that question and if there are options that do not use mesh.
Very interesting. I mean, I think ideally, if you can just, as you already said, you know, proactively catch it before it becomes an issue, that's the best case scenario.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so what else? Your social media, your website, where can people find you and download, you know, all the things that you have going on or any new projects you're working on? Share.
Yeah, thank you. So vaginacoach.com is my website, and my programs, the challenges, also the professional certification courses are all listed there. Social media wise, Vagina Coach, Facebook and Instagram. I'm most active on Instagram. I also have a private group on Facebook called Box Talk. So it's a private place where people can ask questions that they don't want to post on social media, or they want to have a community to kind of connect with. And in terms of what I'm working on, so I am updating the professional courses with new research that will come out in the next week or so. And the other one is, right now, when people take one of my challenges, they can do coaching with me, or they can get one of my programs. But people were wanting, again, that community. They want to feel like they're not alone. They want to be able to connect with other people, and they want a little bit more of the, rather than give me all this information that I have to decipher myself, I want to be kind of led through the process. So I've created it'll be an ongoing kind of an extension almost of the challenges, where there's a daily pelvic floor workout. There's a community support forum where you can ask questions of me, where I will have live Q&As. There's guest expert interviews. So for instance, as I said, with Dr. Crawford will be one of those. There's nutrition meal plans. So people are asking, what do you eat? So there's meal plans for various aspects of women's health. There's an exercise library. There's workouts. So a new workout, a new guest expert, and a new meal plan is released every single month.
Wow.
And people, so that will be an ongoing sentence. So I'm launching that. I was hoping for October. It might not be until early November, but we'll see what I can make happen in the next couple of months. But that will be, it's called the Buff Muff Community, and it's only open for people who have taken one of the challenges. So if you want part of that, if you're pregnant, do the Birth Like a Boss challenge. If you're not pregnant, do the Buff Muff challenge. And then the next step is you can join in with the community. Amazing.
And how long in general, because I'm sure the lengths vary, are the pelvic floor workouts?
So in the Buff Muff challenge, they start out about 5 minutes, and then by the second week, they're about 10 minutes a day, and they're movement focused. So you're not just sitting, do 12 Kegels while you brush your teeth today, or, it's not that type of thing. It's very movement based. And so it's not meant to be super long. And even when I have the community going, I will add, weight training and yoga and that type of thing. But all workouts, nothing will be more than 30 minutes. They'll all be kind of somewhere between the 10 to 20-ish range for the majority.
Amazing. Well, thank you for your time. That was super insightful. I learned a whole lot, and I'm sure the viewers will as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
And be well and stay well. And thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Ariel. Take care.
Of course. Yes, have a good day.